If you're listening late at night, tucked in somewhere far from here, let me welcome you to a journey back in time. Close your eyes and imagine this towering red palace walls under a quiet midnight sky. The glow of lantern light flickering against carved wooden beams, and a hush so deep you can almost hear the moonlight. We're stepping inside the Forbidden City, into a world of whispers and secrets. And trust me, you'll want to stay till the end of this story, because the palace walls have seen things that will surprise you. Before we begin, a small request from a friend. If you find yourself drawn into this tale, please give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Whether you're in a cozy bedroom in London or a midnight kitchen in Kansas, I love hearing how far our late-night travels reach. All right, get comfortable. Take a slow breath. Ready? Let's walk through the vermilion gates now. Nice and easy. You and I are now in old Peking, under the same stars but in a very different world. The air smells of sandalwood incense and distant lotus blooms. Feel the worn stone path under your feet as we pass through a gate so large it could swallow 10 men. On its golden door studs, 9 rows of 9, because in this realm even numbers bow to the emperor's luck. Our fingertips graze cool metal. The night air is balmy in summer, or maybe crisp in autumn. Either way, it's alive with a sense of hush. Overhead, the roofs are tiled with imperial yellow glazed tiles that catch the moonlight like faint halos. Somewhere a wind chime tinkles, just once, and then silence again. Here we are in the Forbidden City, the heart of Imperial China, a place as beautiful as it is forbidden. For centuries, ordinary people weren't even allowed to peek inside these walls. But tonight, we have a special pass. We're going to slip into the inner courts, past all those magnificent halls where emperors sat on gilded thrones. We're heading deeper, where few outsiders ever went into the living quarters of the Imperial Concubines. Now, you might have heard the word concubine before. It's an old term for women who lived with the emperor as part of his vast household. Some were nobility, some were even poor girls once. But here, inside these walls, they all share the same fate to serve and perhaps bear a child for the Son of Heaven. In the Forbidden City, there were hundreds of them at times, even thousands in certain eras. Can you imagine thousands of women, each one hoping to be noticed by one man, the emperor, and most of them living out their days behind these red walls without ever so much as holding his hand? It's almost unbelievable, but it's true. So how did a young woman end up in this gilded cage? And what was life really like for her, day by day, night by night, in this maze of silk and shadows? That's what we're here to discover. We'll follow the journey of one such young concubine, and through her eyes, you'll see the splendor and the sorrow, the intrigue and isolation that filled her world. Our story tonight is rooted in real history. The details, the rules, even some of the scandals, are all drawn from the records and whispered legends of the Forbidden City. But I'll tell it to you like a friend sharing a secret over tea. Not a dry lecture. There will be moments that might make you smile, perhaps a witty aside or a bit of palace gossip, and moments that might send a little shiver down your spine. Don't worry, though. I'll be right here with you the whole way, guiding you through the dark corridors and moonlit courtyards. All right, the hour is late. The world outside is quiet. Let's not keep the lady waiting. It's time to step fully into her story. Our heroine's name is Mei Ling, a name that means plum blossom. But within these walls, she's hardly called by name at all. Titles matter more here. She's been given a modest rank, something like attendant or noble lady, one of those lower rungs on the ladder of the emperor's harem. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Right now, Mei Ling is simply a terrified, hopeful 17-year-old girl arriving at the Forbidden City for the first time. Picture her earlier that very day, when the sun was shining and drums were rolling in, welcome as the emperor returned from a ceremony. Mei Ling came through the Shenwu Divine Martial Gate of the Forbidden City in a procession of selected girls, her heart pounding as heavy as the palace door behind her. She's clutching a small bundle of belongings, a silk handkerchief embroidered by her mother, maybe a hairpin from her grandmother. That's all she was allowed to bring. The rest of her life, everything she will own and wear, will be provided by the emperor's household now. As the selection concluded and the chosen few were led deeper into the Forbidden City, Mei Ling felt as if she were walking through a dream. Palace officials guided her small group along the marble-paved avenues of the outer court. She caught sight of the majestic Hall of Supreme Harmony rising in the distance, the largest wooden hall in China, with its roof glazed in sun-bright yellow and its massive pillars carved with coiling dragons. Even from afar, the sight made her breath catch. They passed a sprawling courtyard so vast that it seemed to dwarf the people crossing it. Later, she would learn this plaza could hold tens of thousands during grand ceremonies. Giant bronze vats stood sentry along the walls, remnants of an age when they held water to fight palace fires. On either side of the great doors, mythical guardian lions glinted, one with a ball under its paw, one with a cub, symbols of peace and imperial power. Mei Ling barely had time to marvel at these wonders as the officials hurried them on. They passed under an ornate gate and left the outer court's overwhelming grandeur behind, entering the comparatively intimate realm of the inner court, the living quarters of the imperial family and concubines. The contrast was striking. Here were shaded pathways, clusters of smaller palaces with poetic names, and secluded gardens whisper quiet except for the trill of cicadas. The air smelled of blossoms and distant incense. Still, traces of the Forbidden City's immense scale were everywhere. The red palace walls loomed high around them, and even minor halls were adorned with imperial yellow tiles. Mei Ling realized with a mix of awe and trepidation that this enclosed world of splendor would be her home now, a beautiful prison she was not likely to leave again. Fast forward to now, Mei Ling has passed through all those trials, left behind her old world, and stepped into the Forbidden City as a newly appointed concubine. It's nighttime on her very first day inside. She has been assigned living quarters in one of the elegant palaces in the western wing designated for the harem. Specifically, they place her in the Palace of Eternal Spring, a poetic name for a compound that will be her home from now on. It's a modest courtyard complex with a front hall, a few side rooms, and a gated yard. Compared to any house outside, it's luxurious. But compared to the grandeur of the main halls, it's a quiet little corner. When she first steps into her assigned chamber, the sun is setting, painting the sky orange beyond the carved lattice windows. Dust motes dance in the last light of day. The room smells faintly of jasmine. Perhaps the previous occupant loved scented sachets. On a polished wooden table stands a bronze mirror and a few ivory combs. On the wall hangs a silk scroll painting of plum blossoms in snow. Someone must have thought it fitting for a girl named Mei Ling. And waiting inside to greet her is an older woman in palace dress, not a concubine but a head maid, who bows and calls her mistress. Imagine that only yesterday Mei Ling was bowing to everyone else, and now someone bows to her. The headmaid's name is Li Hua, though she will only be addressed as Sister Li Hua by Mei Ling. She's a sturdy, middle-aged lady with kind eyes but a strict posture, and she's been in the palace for perhaps 2 decades, serving other concubines, so she knows the drill. Li Hua helps Mei Ling change out of her travel-worn clothes into fresh silk robes provided by the palace wardrobe. Layer upon layer of fine material. Mei Ling has never worn such expensive fabric before. It's both delightful and daunting. The weight of the silk reminds her that nothing here is light or casual. Even the clothes feel like a responsibility. As Li Hua adjusts Mei Ling's collar, she gently begins to brief the young woman on what to expect. Her tone is respectful but a bit motherly. "This will be your residence. Lady Mei Ling," she says, fastening a jade button. "If you need anything, pull that bell cord by the door, and one of us will attend you. There are 4 maids assigned to you, including myself. We'll take turns on duty." Mei Ling nods, trying to absorb it all. They sit down, and Li Hua pours tea. How welcome that warmth is after the long, exhausting day. For a moment, sipping tea in a quiet room, Mei Ling feels a small wave of homesickness hit her. She recalls evenings at home pouring tea for her own mother. Her eyes sting, but she blinks the feeling away. This is no time to cry. Li Hua continues, voice low and even each morning, at the sound of the first bell. "You'll need to rise and dress. We will help you. If Her Majesty the Empress holds a greeting ceremony, you must attend to pay respects." Ah yes. Mei Ling remembers that from her crash course in palace protocol, the concubines periodically line up to greet the Empress, who is the official wife of the Emperor and the mother of the nation. The Empress is effectively the queen bee of this hive, and no one wants to get on her bad side. As the evening deepens, Li Hua mentions other duties and freedoms. On most days, if there are no special events, you are free to spend time as you wish within the inner court. You may practice calligraphy, stroll in the gardens, visit the Temple of Earthly Tranquility for prayer, or socialize in the courtyards. But here she gives a small sigh, as if this next part is important. You cannot leave the inner court or have contact with anyone outside unless explicitly permitted. Mei Ling knew this intellectually, but hearing it stated so plainly makes her throat tighten. The inner court, the northern half of the Forbidden City, is now her entire world. Those high vermilion walls mark the boundary she may never cross freely again. Family visits will be rare to non-existent. Letters, if allowed, will be censored or dictated through official channels. She is, for all intents and purposes, cut off from her old life. A beautiful prison, she thinks. The term gilded cage flashes in her memory, something one of the servants whispered during the selection. At the time she was too excited to pay it any mind, but now it truly hits home. I am caged here. Mei Ling's hands tremble just a little on her teacup, producing a tiny clink. Li Hua notices and pauses. It's a lot to take in. I know, the older woman says softly. When I first came to serve in the palace, I was overwhelmed too. But you'll settle in. Think of it, you'll want for nothing here. Fine clothes, good food, servants at your beck and call. Many would envy such fortune. She smiles, and Mei Ling tries to smile back. Yes, fortune. It's true. She's technically extremely fortunate. In material terms, she just won the life lottery of Imperial China. Yet why does she feel a pang of dread alongside the marble floors and painted screens night falls? Palace attendants light a silk lantern in Mei Ling's room, casting a gentle golden glow. They bring in dinner, a surprisingly lavish tray for one young woman. There are at least 6 dishes: stewed fish with ginger, shredded chicken with spring bamboo, jade-colored dumplings, a bowl of bird's nest soup sweetened with honey, and 2 kinds of delicate pastries. It's far more than she could ever eat alone. She learns quickly that the imperial kitchen is generous to all the emperor's women, though even in food, hierarchy matters. A quick aside from Li Hua, the empress up in her grand palace would be receiving perhaps 21 pounds of premium meat in a single day's provisions for her household. Not that she could eat so much. It's ceremonial abundance, whereas someone of Mei Ling's low rank gets about 5 pounds. But even 5 pounds is a feast for a modest girl. Mei Ling is astounded. She shares some of her dinner with her maids, insisting on it despite their protests. Oh no, we can eat the servants' meals. Mistress, nonsense. How can I finish all this? Please have some. In that small act of kindness, she wins the silent appreciation of these women, who will be her closest, perhaps only companions. After dinner, Mei Ling finally has a moment to herself as the maids withdraw to give her privacy. She stands in the courtyard of the Palace of Eternal Spring, gazing up at the night sky, and that's where we find her now at this late hour, which is right where our story opened. Under the same moon, but now knowing who she is and how she got here. Mei Ling draws her silk shawl tighter as a night breeze rustles the leaves of a pomegranate tree in the corner of the courtyard. From somewhere far off, she hears a faint sound of laughter, other concubines perhaps, in some distant pavilion, or maybe it's the echo of eunuchs trading jokes on their way to a night watch. The Forbidden City is surprisingly quiet for a place that houses thousands of souls between the imperial family. Concubines, eunuchs, maids, and guards. By imperial decree, it's supposed to be tranquil at night. Loud noise is almost sacrilege here, alone with her thoughts. Mei Ling feels a mix of anxiety and wonder, she thinks. So this is it. I live here now. At 17, it's hard to fully grasp forever, but she has an inkling that her life has irreversibly changed. Her mind drifts back to the farewells with her family. Her father, chest swelling with pride that his daughter might serve the emperor. Her mother, trying not to cry as she told Mei Ling to obey and survive. A whisper from an aunt. Don't stand out too much, but don't be invisible either. Just try to be safe. Good advice, perhaps. Safe. Mei Ling murmurs to herself, looking around the pretty little courtyard with its rock garden and koi pond shimmering under the moon. Is she safe here from war or poverty? Certainly, no enemy soldiers or famine can reach her behind these mighty walls. She's cocooned in the richest palace on earth. Yet, as she will soon learn, safety is a relative thing. There are other dangers that lurk in the gilded shadows, petty jealousies, imperial whims, the caprices of those more powerful than she. But for now, on her first night, she can't see those clearly. They are just dark shapes on the periphery of her mind. One of those shapes takes form as a memory of something Sister Li Hua mentioned in passing during dinner. Naturally, my lady. You know that we are all here to serve His Majesty. You must never fraternize with any other man. Not that you will even meet any. No men are allowed in the inner court except eunuchs. And eunuchs, well, they're not really men in that way. At this blunt reminder, Mei Ling had blushed and nearly choked on her soup. Of course she knew that. It's the very definition of a concubine's life. From now on, the emperor is the only man in her existence, and even he will be a rare presence, practically a myth, unless fortune favors her. She doesn't expect the emperor tonight. Certainly not. New concubines usually spend some time being groomed and instructed further before they might share the imperial bed. That, at least, is what the rumors said. So Mei Ling knows this night is likely to be hers alone, perhaps her last truly private night for who knows how long. In the soft lantern light of her chamber, Mei Ling prepares to sleep. The bed is wide and draped with silk curtains embroidered with peonies. As she lies down, she notices the mattress is firmer than she's used to, stuffed with dense cotton. It feels a bit unfamiliar. She turns on her side and tries to will herself into rest, but her mind is buzzing. So many new impressions, so many fears and hopes swirling around. She recalls a snippet from earlier the Empress Dowager's face in the throne room during the final selection. Just a glimpse, but enough to sense the sharp intelligence and authority in that old lady's eyes. If there's someone to fear, it might be her, Mei Ling thinks. The Empress Dowager, the Emperor's mother, has no equal in the inner palace. Not even the young Empress, the Emperor's wife, would cross her lightly. There are already whispers that this Empress Dowager holds the real power behind the scenes. A chill goes through Mei Ling at the thought of accidentally angering such a person. Walk carefully, she reminds herself, like stepping around coiled dragons. That's what life here will be, navigating an ornate garden full of hidden snakes and dragons. Yet, amidst the worry, there is also a spark of excitement. She allows herself a tiny, secret smile in the dark. She is here, in the Forbidden City, the center of the world. So many dream of it, and she's living it. Perhaps she might even win the Emperor's favor one day. What would that be like? The face of the young Emperor comes to her mind. She barely looked at him, but she heard he is handsome and scholarly. To be chosen by him, to spend a night in warmth and royal affection. Her cheeks warm at the thought. It's a girlish fantasy. Maybe. But it's better than dwelling on fear. So she falls asleep eventually, with that hopeful image in her mind, the possibility, however slim, that she might capture the heart, or at least the interest, of the Son of Heaven. And so ends Mei Ling's first day in the Forbidden City. As she sleeps, the night deepens. The nearly full moon casts a pale glow over the roofs and courtyards. Eunuch guards make their rounds, their lanterns bobbing like fireflies in the distance. From Mei Ling's tiny palace, not a sound emerges. Within, she sleeps alone in a silk-covered bed, watched over by paintings of eternal spring, perhaps dreaming of home, or of an emperor's gaze, or nothing at all. Little does she know the mix of delight and trials that await. But come morning, the sun will rise over those yellow roofs, and the machinery of palace life will start turning again. And with that, our tale will continue into the ordinary and not-so-ordinary days of an imperial concubine. Sunlight filters through patterned window screens, painting lattice shadows on the floor. Mei Ling wakes at the sound of a distant bell and the gentle prodding of her maid. It's her first full morning as an imperial concubine. There's a moment, just as she blinks herself awake, when she forgets where she is, She half expects to see her old bedroom. Instead, her eyes open to a high ceiling painted with golden clouds and a dressing table laid out with combs of ivory and jade. Reality rushes in. I'm in the Forbidden City. Li Hua and the younger maids help Mei Ling dress. Today, she is instructed to wear a champagne-colored silk robe with embroidered peonies. She notices the color is specifically chosen, not the bright golden yellow reserved for the empress and highest consorts, but a soft light gold appropriate for lower-ranked concubines. Even the hue of your clothes here announces your status before you say a word. Mei Ling's hair is coiled into an elegant shape and adorned with a delicate hairpin featuring a tiny kingfisher feather ornament. Beautiful, yet not too extravagant. Appear too plain and you seem disrespectful to the emperor's generosity. Appear too glamorous and you might draw unwanted envy. It's a careful balance, like everything in this life. This morning there is to be a formal greeting with the empress. Mei Ling's stomach flutters as Li Hua reminds her of the protocols. Kowtow 3 times. Address her as Huang Ho Niang Niang Empress Majesty. Keep your eyes low unless spoken to. The empress, she knows, is the emperor's primary wife and the officially highest woman in the palace. As such, all concubines must show her utmost deference, regardless of how much or little the emperor favors the empress personally. Mei Ling joins a small procession of other concubines heading toward the empress's quarters, a grand building known as the Palace of Compassion and Tranquility. Along covered walkways and through rock gardens they go, a flutter of silks and whispered chatter. The other young women eye Mei Ling with curiosity. She's the newcomer. Some offer polite smiles, others barely acknowledge her. She feels as though she's back in the selection lineup, being quietly judged on every detail of her posture and appearance. In the reception hall, shafts of morning light slant down onto polished wood floors. Incense coils release a thin stream of sandalwood-scented smoke. The empress sits upon a raised platform, flanked by a few high-ranking ladies. Mei Ling steals a quick glance as she enters. The empress is perhaps in her late 20s, serene and regal. Her gown is a rich golden yellow, dragon motifs shimmering on the fabric, and a fan of ornate phoenix pins crowns her black hair. Despite the lavish attire, the empress's face has a calm, somewhat distant expression, the look of someone accustomed to being respected. One by one, the concubines file in according to age and rank, with the highest status women first. Mei Ling, as a newcomer and low ranker, is toward the back of the group. She follows along, imitating the others as they kneel gracefully and touch their foreheads to the floor in unison. A full kowtow. Mei Ling's heart thuds as she prostrates herself. The polished wood floor feels cool even through the layers of her skirts as her forehead touches it. She can smell the faint trace of sandalwood incense from somewhere in the hall, and hear the rustle of embroidered robes around her as all the women bow low. A tiny bead of sweat trickles down her back despite the morning chill. Such is the anxiety of this first formal impression. The empress allows them to rise and gives a slight smile. "Good morning, sisters." The empress greets them softly. "I trust you all slept well. Our Lord will be busy today with the council, so tend to your studies and health." It's a routine greeting, delivered in an even tone. Her eyes pass over the assembled concubines. When those eyes flicker over Mei Ling, who remains properly bowed, she pauses a beat. "I see we have a new, graceful swan among us," the empress remarks. There's an undercurrent to her voice that Mei Ling can't quite decipher. perhaps just acknowledging the addition. "What is your name?" Child Mei Ling's heart jumps into her throat. She hadn't expected to be addressed directly on her first greeting. Keeping her eyes down, she responds respectfully. "This humble one's name is Mei Ling. Your Majesty." "Mei Ling," repeats the Empress. "Ah, Plum Blossom. A lovely name. Well, plum blossoms endure cold winters. Do they not? I hope you will endure and blossom here as well." Mei Ling utters a polite thank you with another bow. Endure and blossom. It is hard to tell if that was just a kind sentiment or perhaps a gentle warning encoded in poetic words. In this palace, conversations often have layers. With that, the Empress moves on to minor palace business. She might mention an upcoming festival ceremony or commend a certain concubine for helping with the Emperor's tea ceremony last week. Mei Ling listens quietly. She's relieved that the Empress seemed neutral or even kindly toward her. A good start, she hopes. However, not everyone in the hall is quite so welcoming. As they take their leave, walking backwards respectfully until out of the Empress's presence, Mei Ling feels a pair of eyes drilling into her. One of the women near the Empress's side, a striking beauty in an embroidered red robe, is watching Mei Ling with open interest and a hint of something else. Amusement, contempt. This is noble consort Li, one of the highest-ranked concubines in the harem. Noble consort Li has a position second only to the Empress, and rumor says she is currently the Emperor's favorite plaything. She's known to be clever and ambitious. The slight curl of her lips as she regards Mei Ling sends a little chill down the newcomer's spine. Mei Ling instinctively lowers her gaze further. She has the sense that noble consort Li might be weighing whether this new plum blossom could ever pose a threat in the garden where she, Lai, reigns as the prize peony. Outside the hall, the concubines disperse into smaller groups. Those of similar rank tend to flock together, an unconscious hierarchy even in socializing. Mei Ling stands a little apart, unsure where she fits in. Just then, she hears a soft voice at her shoulder. "Hello there. I'm Anling, turning." Mei Ling sees a gentle-looking young woman with a round face and kind eyes. She recalls seeing her in the procession. Anling must be of relatively low rank too, since she stood near Mei Ling at the back. Mei Ling offers a small smile. "It's nice to meet you, Sister Anling." Anling gestures for her to walk together across the courtyard. Servants are bringing out trays of morning refreshments under a pavilion, tea and little lotus seed cakes, and some ladies are gathering there to chat now that the formalities are done. The two new acquaintances move that way. I remember how lost I felt on my first day. Anling confides quietly as they stroll. "So I thought you might use a friend." Mei Ling's heart warms at the word friend. I would like that very much," she says softly. Truly, having someone to talk to is a blessing. Over warm tea, the two exchange basics. Anling has been in the palace 2 years. I came in the same batch as Consort Shu over there. She nods discreetly toward a poised lady in pale blue, but unlike her, I've remained a bit invisible, which, honestly, has its advantages. Mei Ling tilts her head. Advantages to being invisible. In a place where every concubine's nominal goal is to catch the Emperor's eye, that seems counterintuitive. She voices her curiosity carefully. "You mean to avoid drama?" Anling gives a wry little smile. "Exactly. I learned quickly that being too noticed, especially before you have any real standing, can paint a target on your back. She breaks a lotus cake in two and offers half to Mei Ling. Take noble consort Li, for example. She didn't get to where she is by being sweet. It's whispered that any concubine who even looked like she might become the emperor's new favorite has found themselves out of favor very fast. Mysteriously fast. Mei Ling feels the cake heavy in her throat. Poison. She instinctively glances across the pavilion at noble consort Li, who now laughs charmingly at something another high-ranked lady says. In broad daylight, under blossoming apricot trees, with demure laughter echoing. It's hard to reconcile that serene scene with the idea of hidden poison. But Mei Ling doesn't doubt Anling's word. This place, she realizes, is as dangerous as it is beautiful. Just because the danger wears a smile and silk robes doesn't mean it's not lethal. Seeking to change to a lighter subject for a moment, Mei Ling asks Anling about the Empress. She seemed kind enough, though a bit distant. Anling nods. The Empress is known to be fair. She upholds the rules but isn't needlessly cruel. She's had her own sorrows, lost a baby a few years ago. I hear. The Emperor respects her, but... Anling lowers her voice. His passion for her is mild. They were a political match. He spends far more nights with noble consort Lai, or other favorites. That leaves the Empress somewhat lonely, I think. But she maintains her dignity. As long as no one openly challenges her authority as the head of the harem, she doesn't interfere much in our affairs. This is useful insight. It sounds like, at least from the Empress's side, Mei Ling won't face malice. But the Empress also might not protect her if trouble arises, especially if it's harem squabbles that don't break any official rules. The morning unfolds peacefully enough. After breakfast, Mei Ling decides to take a walk and familiarize herself with the palace grounds that she's allowed to roam. The inner court is a world unto itself. Lovely pavilions, winding pebble paths, lotus ponds, and rock gardens, all enclosed by high red walls. As she and Anling wander, they pass other concubines engaging in various activities. A pair of ladies sit under a willow tree plucking softly at ruined lutes, practicing a new melody. A small group is gathered around a wakey-go board, contemplating their strategies, in a gazebo by a pond. A few women watch with amusement as one bold sister kneels on a swing, trying to make it go higher without tumbling off, her laughter tinkling through the air. Mei Ling finds herself smiling at a particular sight, a young concubine cuddling a fluffy white cat while chatting with her companion. As if on cue, a golden puppy scampers out from behind a rock and barks at the cat, sending it fleeing from the lady's lap. The women giggle as the cat leaps to a roof beam for safety. Anling laughs quietly next to Mei Ling. The palace has so many pets, cats, dogs, even some songbirds. It's like a little zoo. The emperor permits it because his late mother loved animals, and it keeps us occupied. There are caretakers just to feed and groom them. Can you imagine over 100 cats and dogs at one point? I heard. Mei Ling can imagine it now, seeing the creatures roam freely. The animals provide a bit of warmth in an otherwise formal environment. She makes a note to find a friendly kitten later. Perhaps caring for a pet could ease some loneliness. As noon approaches, the emperor's schedule takes him to the Hall of Mental Cultivation, a building not far from the harem quarters, where he often works and rests. He will likely have lunch and perhaps a short rest afterward. This means that concubines, especially the favored ones, might be summoned or might attempt to make themselves visible in case he's in the mood for company. Sure enough, noble consort Li, dressed now in a stunning red silk jacket with golden peony motifs, strolls deliberately near the covered walkway she knows the emperor will use. She carries a small lacquered box. Meiling and Anling watch from a distance, among a cluster of pomegranate trees where they had been walking. I wonder what she's planning. Meiling muses, offering him some homemade sweet. Probably, Anling says. She's famed for her red bean cakes. Every move calculated, that one. A few other mid-ranked consorts also linger hopefully in the general area, pretending to admire flowers or feed fish in the pond, any excuse to be seen if the emperor passes by. Meiling, not eager to thrust herself forward so soon, half hides behind the foliage with Anling. Presently, the emperor comes into view, preceded by two eunuchs. He is not on a sedan or horse, just walking, albeit under a yellow silk parasol held by a eunuch to shield him from the sun. Meiling's breath catches. This is the first time she's seen him outside of that formal throne room encounter. He's dressed in a simple yet elegant robe of deep blue, with only a small dragon emblem on the chest marking his status. From this closer perspective, he appears youthful, likely in his mid-20s, with a composed face, thin mustache, and alert, dark eyes. He's in conversation with the gray-haired chief eunuch beside him, discussing something in low tones. Noble consort Li steps forward into the pathway, executing a flawless bow just as the emperor approaches. "Your Majesty," she says in a melodious voice, "forgive my impudence. I wish to offer you these mung bean cakes I made. I thought they might refresh you this warm day." She presents the lacquered box, opening it to reveal artfully arranged green cakes. The emperor pauses, a faint smile appearing. "Li Fei, ever thoughtful," he acknowledges, using her title suffixed with Fei, meaning consort. He takes one of the small cakes and pops it into his mouth. "Delicious. You have a talent that outshines our imperial kitchen," he compliments lightly. Noble consort Li's eyes light with pleasure at the praise. Watching this little scene, Meiling feels a mix of emotions, a touch of envy at how confidently Li interacts with the emperor, relief that she herself wasn't under that scrutiny, and an unexpected pang of admiration. The emperor's voice when he spoke was gentle, with a warmth that one might not expect in such an aloof setting. For a moment, as he smiled, he looked less like an untouchable demigod and more like a young man enjoying a treat given by a pretty woman. After a few more pleasant words, the emperor continues on his way. Noble consort Li trails alongside him for a bit, emboldened by his friendly acceptance, no doubt trying to extend the encounter. Her laughter peals at something he says, and then the entourage moves out of earshot. Meiling lets out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. Anling pats her arm. See that her hold on him seems strong, but it's built on small moments like these. She likely planned that all morning. "Does His Majesty ever come this way?" "By the gardens," Meiling asks softly, still gazing after the vanished figures. "Sometimes." Anling says, he enjoys the gardens and will occasionally stroll in the afternoons. Concubines who happen to be nearby might get a chance to chat. Honestly, though, for most of us, those encounters are few and far between. Many ladies here haven't spoken directly with him in years, or ever. Some live and die in these walls without hearing him say more than a formal greeting. Her tone is matter of fact, but Meiling can sense the melancholy behind it. Imagine dedicating your youth to someone who might never even look at you properly. As days turn to weeks, Mei settles into a routine. Mornings often begin with either a greeting to the Empress or, if none is scheduled, quiet breakfasts in her own quarters. Then she practices calligraphy. She's determined to improve her poetry. The Emperor is known to appreciate literary talent. On some days, tutors come to teach music or art. Yes, even inside the palace. The women continue to cultivate accomplishments, partly to entice the Emperor, partly to stave off boredom. Mei finds solace in painting. She spends afternoons in the shade of a pear tree, painting delicate branches and sparrows with ink and brush. Anling and she meet often, walking or playing chess. The companionship helps immensely. They even share occasional giggles, like mischievous schoolgirls, when, far from prying ears. They mimic the overly sycophantic tone one of the senior consorts uses around the Emperor. This particular lady, Consort Xian, has a habit of elongating her syllables in an affected manner. "Your Majesty is too wise," she would coo. So one afternoon, Anling and Mei take turns silently mouthing those words with dramatic fluttering eyelashes, sending each other into fits of suppressed laughter. In those moments, they feel like the teenagers they still are, peeking out from beneath the heavy mantle of court etiquette. While Meiling's days hold moments of levity with her friend, under the surface, tensions brew elsewhere in the harem. As Anling warned, noble consort Li's eyes are on Meiling now. She has noticed the Emperor glancing at the new concubine once or twice in passing. With every small favor Meiling gains, a kind word here, a seat closer to the Emperor at a poetry recital there. Li's smile grows a little tighter. One peaceful afternoon, as Meiling is practicing a simple melody on the guqin, a palace maid arrives with unexpected news by imperial edict. Meiling is to attend the Emperor for dinner tonight. Meiling's heart leaps and then pounds. The Emperor has summoned her tonight. She sets the instrument aside with trembling hands. It seems fortune or fate is moving faster than she anticipated. Li Hua immediately takes charge, dismissing the other maids to begin preparations. Meiling is given a perfumed bath, rose petals swirling in the copper tub, and then dressed in an evening gown of soft violet silk that brings out the delicate glow of her skin. The excitement in her maids' faces is palpable. This is a significant moment, the first real sign of favor. By twilight, Meiling waits in her chamber, anxiety and anticipation swirling in her chest. Will she spend the night with the Emperor? Likely yes, if he's called her to dine. What will he be like in private? The unknowns make her mind race. Soon, a eunuch arrives to escort her. Meiling follows him through lamp-lit corridors to the Emperor's private apartments, specifically, a cozy pavilion attached to the Hall of Mental Cultivation. Her nerves jangle with each step. She reminds herself of Sister Li Hua's guidance: be obedient, be gentle, respond when spoken to, but don't be too forward, and above all, do not show fear. Inside, the pavilion is warm and quiet. The Emperor sits at a low table set for two, candles casting a mellow glow on the carved red lacquerware and steaming dishes. He stands as she enters, which surprises her. She did not expect the sun of heaven to rise for her, but it is a gesture of welcome, perhaps, to put her at ease. She executes a deep curtsy, nearly lowering to her knees. "Your Majesty," she hopes her voice isn't shaking. The emperor steps forward and, to her astonishment, personally offers his hand to raise her from the bow. He is smiling gently. "Lady Meiling," he says, and hearing her name in his voice, a voice young and warm, not cold and distant, makes her breath come a little easier. "Please sit. You mustn't be so nervous." He guides her to a cushion by the table. The eunuchs have discreetly withdrawn to the corners of the room, out of earshot. It is as private an audience as one could wish for. He asks her gentle questions. How old is she? 17. Which province is she from? Shandong. Does she enjoy music? Yes. She plays the guqin a little, though not expertly. His manner is patient and polite, as though he has all the time in the world to learn about her. Meiling answers softly, careful to be respectful, but honest. As she answers, the emperor shares a few small recollections of his own. When Meiling mentions she loves the scent of plum blossoms, she does not add that her name means plum blossom. She assumes he knows. The emperor's eyes brighten. "I spent one spring in the summer palace as a boy," he says, voice thoughtful. "There was a grove of wild plum trees that bloomed late one year. The petals fell into the lake like snow. My mother, the Empress Dowager, told me the sight meant hope survives even in adversity. I never forgot that." Meiling feels her heart stir at this gentle confidence. The emperor rarely speaks of personal memories. She realizes. She listens, imagining the young prince catching plum petals in his small hands. Encouraged by his openness, she offers, "Perhaps that is why your majesty noticed me. A plum blossom surviving the winter. It's a bold, almost playful statement, and for a split second she worries she has been too familiar. But the emperor's eyes light up with amusement and warmth. Perhaps you're right." He chuckles. "The winter has been long, and it's time for blossoms." That soft, almost poetic exchange settles something in the air between them, a shared understanding beyond formal roles. The emperor pours wine from a porcelain ewer into 2 tiny cups. Meiling accepts hers with both hands, as etiquette dictates, though her fingers tremble slightly. To steady herself, she takes a small sip. The wine is warm and spiced with chrysanthemum, sweet and calming. He gestures for her to start eating. There are delicate spring rolls, a fragrant duck soup, glazed lotus roots stuffed with sweet rice, an intimate meal prepared for 2. As they dine, the conversation flows more easily. He inquires about her family. Her father is a minor official back home. Her talents, she shyly admits she can paint a little. He seems pleased by that. All the while, he maintains a kindly eye contact, not too intense, but attentive. Meiling begins to lose the edge of her fear. She even manages to compliment the emperor's poetry she'd heard he writes in his spare time by referencing a couplet from one of his published poems. He looks genuinely surprised and impressed that she knew it. After the meal, the emperor leads her to a side chamber, his private sitting room, where a zither and books are laid out. It seems he intended a relaxed evening. He asks if she'll play something on the guqin for him. Meiling's nerves flare up again at the request, but she obeys. Kneeling gracefully by the instrument, she plucks a simple melody called Spring by the Flower Pavilion. Her technique is not masterful, but the tune is soothing in the dimly lit room. The emperor closes his eyes, listening appreciatively. When she finishes, he sighs. Lovely. That song takes me back to my childhood. Emboldened. Meiling ventures a soft question. What was his childhood like? The emperor smiles ruefully, lonely at times, splendid at others. Not so different from the life we all live here, I suppose. The frankness in his tone touches her. He sets aside his wine cup and gently takes hers from her hand as well, placing it down. There is a moment of quiet. Meiling's heart is thrumming like a hummingbird, but she remembers to breathe slowly. The emperor reaches out and brushes a stray lock of hair from her forehead, his fingertips warm against her skin. "You're very beautiful, Meiling," he murmurs. Meiling's face burns at the compliment. "Your Majesty is gracious," she answers softly, eyes lowered demurely. Inside, she feels a flutter of shy happiness, a moth circling a flame that could burn or illuminate. He moves closer, his robe whispering on the floor, gently, almost tentatively. He tilts her chin up with 2 fingers. Meiling's breath catches. She meets his gaze for an instant. His eyes are softer than she imagined, with faint laugh lines at the corners. And then, tenderly, he leans in and kisses her. It's a soft, searching kiss, her first kiss ever. In fact, Meiling's eyes close instinctively as she yields to the unexpected tenderness. She feels the warmth of his hand as it comes to rest on her back, drawing her a bit closer. Her own hands hover uncertainly before she places them lightly against his chest, feeling the steady beat of an imperial heart beneath. He smells of sandalwood and a hint of sweet wine. For a moment, the world narrows to just that moment. The taste of warmth and the gentle pressure of lips, and Meiling's anxious mind falls wonderfully silent. The kiss deepens slightly. Then he pulls back to look at her. In the low lamplight, his face is calm, but there's a new warmth in his expression. "No need to be afraid," he whispers. And then he stands, offering her his hand once more. "Come." She places her hand in his, and he guides her behind a silk screen into the sleeping area. The imperial bed lies within, large and inviting, draped with golden silk curtains. A brazier nearby keeps the chamber snug against the night chill. Meiling's legs feel like jelly, but she reminds herself that this is her duty, and, perhaps, her desire too, judging by the blush heating her cheeks. The emperor speaks a word to the attending eunuchs at the door, and they silently depart, leaving them truly alone. What happens next behind those curtains, I will leave mostly to your imagination. Told in delicate strokes rather than explicit detail, the emperor carefully slips off Meiling's robe, letting it fall silently to the floor, and her silk undergarments after it. Meiling shivers, more from nerves than cold, as she stands bared under his gaze. But his gentle words, "You are lovely," and the way he wraps the coverlet around them as they lie down gradually dissolves her embarrassment. He takes his time, mindful of her innocence. There are hushed whispers, a few gasps, the rustle of silk sheets. Meiling experiences a rush of sensations new to her, a brief pang of pain at first, then strange, building waves of pleasure that leave her trembling. She bites her lip to keep from crying out after all. The walls have ears in a palace, and a concubine is expected to be decorously quiet even in passion. The emperor's face above hers is at times intent, at times tender. When he notices her wince initially, he murmurs reassuringly and pauses, stroking her hair until she nods for him to continue. In those moments, as the world narrows to just the two of them behind a veil of gold silk, Meiling feels both vulnerable and strangely empowered. for that night, at least. She holds the complete attention and affection of the Son of Heaven, a man who, in daylight, is held distant and exalted beyond reach. And here he is, whispering her name like a lover, not an untouchable sovereign. Eventually, the candles burn low and they lie side by side in the afterglow. The Emperor falls asleep not long after. It's been a long day for him. Mei Ling remains awake a while, staring at the canopy above, trying to comprehend what this night means for her life. She carefully slips out of the bed to tidy herself. A maid had earlier told her it's important to clean up discreetly after. Concubines often bring a silk handkerchief for that purpose. Then she returns and watches him in slumber. By the faint light of a single lantern, his features are relaxed, almost boyish. It's strange to think this sleeping man is the ruler of millions. In that quiet moment, a gentle feeling swells in Mei Ling's chest. Not quite love, it's too soon and too unfamiliar, but a fondness, a connection. She silently promises that she will be loyal and good, hoping he might keep her in his favor. Before dawn, as protocol dictates, eunuchs come to gently wake Mei Ling and escort her back to her quarters. The Emperor himself stirs briefly to tell her she was lovely and that he'd like to have tea with her again sometime. It isn't exactly a declaration of eternal devotion, but it's a positive send-off. Wrapped again in the big yellow quilt, Mei Ling is carried through the cool pre-dawn air back to the palace of eternal spring. Her maids are waiting, excited as sparrows, to greet her. As soon as the eunuchs leave and Mei Ling is in her rooms, the girls break into giggles and Lei Hua squeezes Mei Ling's hands in congratulations. "You did well, I can tell." Lei Hua beams. Usually, if an emperor was displeased, word would come swiftly in some form, a curt message or even a punishment. None of that happened. Indeed, a small golden hairpin arrived as a gift from the emperor's steward shortly after, a token for the knight's companion. Mei Ling holds the hairpin. It's shaped like a plum blossom, gilded and inlaid with a tiny pearl. Her mind is swimming with exhaustion and emotion. She hardly registers the babble of her maids drawing her a bath, asking how it went. She only smiles faintly and says, "His Majesty was kind." As she bathes off the remnants of the night, she touches the marks on her skin, a faint bite on her shoulder, a gentle redness on her neck, and flushes with memory. She feels changed, as if part of her girlhood was left behind in that grand bed. Will he call for me again soon, she wonders, sinking into the warm water scented with magnolia. That question stirs a mix of hope and anxious uncertainty in her chest. The very next day, the court is buzzing quietly with news the emperor spent the night with new Lady Mei Ling. By midday, an official edict is announced. Mei Ling is to be promoted from second-class attendant to noble lady, effective immediately. It was the emperor's way of acknowledging her. A ceremonial eunuch visited her quarters to read out the imperial decree in a sing-song voice. While Mei Ling knelt to receive it, she was formally granted the title Noble Lady Mei, Mei meaning plum blossom, to mark her entry into the higher ranks. With the decree came a delicate gold hairpin, an insignia of her new station. Other concubines watched these proceedings with guarded expressions. Some curtsied and offered polite congratulations, while others whispered envy behind their fans. Mei Ling's emotions were a tangle of pride and caution. She felt honored, certainly. But she also remembered An Ling's warning that rising too high could paint a target on one's back. She accepted the emperor's favor with a graceful bow, vowing inwardly to stay humble and prudent. Word of Meiling's elevation spreads through the inner court like subtle wildfire. In whispers behind fans, concubines murmur that the emperor must be quite taken with the new girl. Noble consort Li certainly hears, though no open hostility shows on her lovely face. She withdraws to her own palace for the day, claiming a headache. Anling later squeezes Meiling's hand and says softly, "Now you see why I said being invisible has its advantages. Please be careful." Meiling nods. She's elated by the emperor's favor, but she isn't naive. Her mind replays Sister Lihua's nightly caution in this world. Envy is never far behind. The Empress regarded her with approval. In one private encounter, the Empress even gently advised Meiling on how to manage her new household attendants. A few weeks after noble consort Li's removal, the Empress invited Meiling to join her for an afternoon in the Palace of Compassion and Tranquility. Meiling arrived nervously at the Empress's elegant courtyard, where chrysanthemums were blooming in late autumn colors. Over fragrant jasmine tea, the Empress spoke with gentle authority. "Consort Mei." She addressed her using the new title the Emperor had granted Meiling upon elevating her rank to consort. "I am pleased to see you recovered. The harem has been more peaceful of late." There was a meaningful undertone to those words, a reference to the absence of noble consort Li's drama. Meiling bowed her head. "Thanks to your Majesty's guidance and the Emperor's grace, all is well again. I am grateful for the harmony." The Empress studied Meiling with calm, dark eyes. Meiling had always found the Empress difficult to read. She was serene, almost to the point of appearing indifferent. But now Meiling sensed a current of genuine concern beneath that placid surface. "You have risen quickly," the Empress said, not unkindly. "It reminds me a little of someone I knew in my youth." Meiling wondered if the Empress was thinking of a friend, or perhaps even herself. The Empress gave a faint smile and continued, "It is no small task to maintain one's composure and dignity with such changes. You have done well so far. You show respect to all and perform your duties without arrogance. For that, I commend you." Meiling felt a warm relief at those words. High praise from the Empress was rare. "I will always strive to uphold the harmony of the inner court that your Majesty values." Meiling replied softly. The Empress set down her teacup. "See that you do." The Emperor's happiness and the stability of the court depend on us women as much as on ministers and armies. Petty rivalries and jealousies can disrupt not only our lives, but also distract His Majesty. I trust you understand." Meiling nodded immediately. "Yes, Your Majesty. I have witnessed how destructive such jealousy can be. I have no wish for any of it. I only hope to support His Majesty in whatever humble way I can." The Empress's gaze gentled. A wise answer. She leaned forward slightly, in a more intimate tone. "Consort Mei, you are still young. There may be times when the Emperor's attention wanders or when others attempt to provoke you. Remain steady. Do not chase favor, and do not let any slights fester into bitterness. Remember that an emperor's heart is vast and can hold many loves, but we each keep our place by being virtuous and calm." Meiling absorbed this advice. It echoed much of what she had already learned through harsh experience, but hearing it from the Empress herself reinforced the lesson. "I will remember Your Majesty's words as long as I live," she promised. The Empress smiled, a real, gentle smile, that illuminated her refined features. Good. Also, if ever you need guidance about managing your household or dealing with palace matters, you may seek counsel from me. I would rather you ask and do things properly than stumble in ignorance. There was almost a maternal note in her voice now. Mei Ling realized that perhaps the Empress, who had no children of her own, took a quiet satisfaction in mentoring the younger concubines who showed potential. In that moment, Mei Ling felt a rush of gratitude. How unlikely, she thought, that the Empress herself would offer help to a former low-ranked girl like her. It showed the Empress truly saw her effort to be cooperative. Mei Ling gave a deep kowtow, touching her forehead to the polished wood floor. Your Majesty is most generous. I am deeply thankful for your guidance and kindness. The Empress allowed Mei Ling to rise and then changed the subject to lighter matters, asking if Mei Ling's family came from a region known for embroidery. They did, and Mei Ling mentioned her mother's skill in that art, and whether Mei Ling enjoyed the new autumn lotus soup recipe the Imperial kitchens had introduced. She had, and praised it. It was a brief, pleasant conversation, but every word the Empress spoke was measured and meaningful. As Mei Ling took her leave, the Empress presented her with a small parting gift, a hairpin of white jade carved into the shape of a plum blossom. For you, the Empress said, as a reminder to keep flourishing through the winter. Mei Ling's eyes widened at the exquisite piece. It was a subtle acknowledgement of the symbolism that Mei Ling represented, the plum blossom that blooms in adversity. With heartfelt thanks, Mei Ling accepted the gift. She returned to her quarters that day feeling steadier than ever. She also became more aware of the rhythms of palace life expected of a consort of her rank. Each day followed a carefully orchestrated pattern. She would rise at dawn to the distant sound of the morning gong echoing across the courtyards. Her maids would already be waiting with hot water and scented soap for her to wash her face. In the cool, early light, Mei Ling would sit as Li Hua brushed out her long black hair over 100 strokes until it gleamed, then coiled it into an elegant style appropriate for the day's activities. Next came her makeup ritual. One maid carefully applied a light dusting of fine rice powder to Mei Ling's face, giving her skin an even porcelain sheen. Another drew a thin, graceful shape to her eyebrows, using a charcoal-based brow pencil. The fashion was to have willow leaf brows, delicate and soft. A touch of carmine rouge went onto her lips and a hint on her cheeks, bringing back a bloom of youthful color. Mei Ling remained still as a porcelain doll during the process. Her eyes cast down, hands resting on her silk robe, while the maids concentrated on perfecting each detail. When they finished, she looked into the bronze mirror and saw a refined lady of the court gazing back, composed, beautifully painted, yet still herself beneath it all. After dressing in a fresh embroidered gown, simpler for casual days, or more elaborate if she might see the emperor on official occasions, Mei Ling would offer a short prayer of thanks at a small altar in her room, often to Guanyin, the bodhisattva of mercy. She had started this habit after her trials, feeling grateful to have survived and hopeful for continued protection. Breakfast was usually taken in her own quarters, a selection of congee or steamed buns, maybe a soft-boiled egg, and pickled vegetables, all prepared by the imperial kitchen and brought by eunuch servers. As a consort, her breakfast was bountiful. Sometimes Mei Ling invited Anling or a few lower-ranked ladies she was friendly with to share the dishes, since she could never finish the generous portions. Over jasmine tea, they would chat about small, benign things, recent embroidery patterns, the weather, perhaps a new song learned on the pipa. Palace rule forbade discussing any imperial business or gossiping about others during these formal visits, so their conversations stayed superficial but companionable. Mid-morning often involved some study or practice. The emperor encouraged his consorts to pursue cultured arts, so Mei Ling might spend an hour practicing calligraphy on fine paper, copying out poems with an ink brush to improve her hand. On other days, she practiced music. Her quarters came equipped with a 7-string guqin zither, and though she was not highly skilled, she enjoyed plucking gentle melodies in solitude. The notes would echo softly off the painted walls of her chamber, providing a soothing backdrop to her maid's quiet sewing work. If the emperor required her presence or if there was an official event, a eunuch would arrive by late morning with instructions. Otherwise, late mornings were often dedicated to leisure or managing her small household as a consort. Mei Ling had several maids and a few eunuchs assigned to her service. She took an active role in treating them kindly yet firmly, remembering the empress's guidance. One afternoon, a junior maid accidentally dropped and shattered a porcelain teacup while serving Mei Ling. The girl fell to her knees at once, trembling and begging silently for mercy. She had seen other mistresses order harsh canings for such slights. Mei Ling instead gently helped the maid pick up the fragments herself, earning a cut on her own finger in the process. "Be careful of the shards," she murmured, more concerned that the maid not hurt herself. To the maid's astonishment, Mei Ling let the matter go with only a mild word of caution about being attentive. The girl wept with relief and gratitude. The incident sent whispers through the servant quarters. Consort Mei was different, unusually compassionate. It made her household staff all the more devoted. She would review the day's menu with her chief maid, perhaps authorize the sewing of a new seasonal robe, or instruct that a small stipend gift be given to a maid whose birthday it was a simple generosity that earned loyalty. These little tasks made her feel more in control of her life, a far cry from when she first arrived, and everything felt overwhelming. By noon, the palace would grow quiet as many rested during the hottest part of the day, or, in winter, retreated to the warm Kang platforms to escape the chill. Mei Ling might take this time to stroll in the inner gardens if weather allowed. Dressed in a light shawl and escorted by 2 maids at a respectful distance, she would wander pathways past ancient cypresses and taihu rockeries. She loved listening to the artificial stream that flowed through the garden, the water trickling over stones. On occasion, she extended her walk to a quieter corner of the inner court where a great glazed wall stood, the famed 9-dragon screen. Its surface bore 9 splendid dragons molded in relief, swirling through clouds. Even in shadow, the wall glimmered with imperial yellow, deep azure, and jade green. Mei Ling would rest her hand on one of the dragon tiles, feeling the cool, smooth enamel under her fingers. Those dragons had stood watch for ages over this enclosed world. Sometimes she imagined they might come to life and carry her beyond the red walls on their backs. But as always, they remained frozen in elegant motion. Still, the simple act of tracing their outline gave her a peculiar comfort, as if drawing strength from these ancient symbols of power. Sometimes, she paused at the fish pond to scatter crumbs and watch the bright orange carp dart greedily, the same fish that, months ago, she had watched with Anling on a much more anxious day. Now, she could enjoy these walks with a measure of contentment, her mind free enough to observe the butterflies dancing over the peonies or the fragrant breeze carrying the perfume of jasmine blossoms. Afternoons might bring visits, Either she would pay respects to the Empress Dowager, or Empress if summoned, or other ladies would come to call on her. She maintained a polite if slightly distant demeanor with most. Having seen the extremes of both friendship and rivalry, Mei Ling was cordial to all, but kept her true feelings guarded, except with her dearest friend, An Ling, if not occupied with social calls. Mei Ling would read. The palace library sent over scrolls of poetry and history at her request. She found solace in verses from long ago, losing herself in tales of immortal heroines or star-crossed lovers, and noting how often the women in those stories met tragic fates, something that resonated deeply with her now. By late afternoon, she would take a light meal or snack, perhaps chilled fruit in summer or hot almond milk in winter. Then came time to prepare, in case the emperor chose her for that night. While the emperor did not visit every consort nightly, there was an official rotation, but also his personal whim. A consort of her standing had to be ready. Her maids would straighten up her rooms, light incense of sandalwood, the emperor's favorite calming scent, and lay out her evening attire. Mei Ling would bathe again. An evening bath with floating rose petals to freshen herself and ensure she carried no lingering scent, but the one of his choosing. As sunset approached, she would dress in a soft bedrobe of silver blue silk, her hair loosely tied back with a satin ribbon. If the eunuchs arrived with a summons, she was prepared. If they did not, she would quietly read or do embroidery by lamplight until night fell. This was the external rhythm of Mei Ling's days, a life of regimentation eased by luxury. On the surface, it might seem idyllic and elegant, every hour filled with silk and music. Yet beneath that surface, she remained vigilant. A single summons from the Empress Dowager, a single rumor of displeasure, could unravel it all. Thus, even in her moments of repose, Mei Ling never forgot to offer a kind word to a servant who looked glum lest discontent fester. Never left a letter or personal writing in the open lest it be misconstrued, and never flaunted her favor from the emperor. As the sun lowered each day and long shadows fell across the courtyards, she often reflected harmony in the palace is not automatic. We women create it daily by swallowing barbs, smiling when hurt, and extending courtesy where it's due. In truth, her apparent serenity was an artful composition, much like the paintings she made, each stroke deliberate, covering any blank or jagged parts with an elegant flourish. One peaceful autumn night, An Ling came to Mei Ling's quarters to share a pot of sweet osmanthus tea, with rivalry and fear no longer pressing on them so tightly. The two friends could finally enjoy simple companionship. They sat by an open window overlooking a lantern-lit garden, breathing in the crisp air. After chatting about lighter matters for a while, their conversation drifted toward palace lore and legends, the kinds of tales every concubine hears whispered over embroidery work or during bath times. "Have you ever heard of the fragrant concubine?" An Ling asked slyly, topping up Mei Ling's porcelain cup. Mei Ling shook her head. Fragrant concubine. What a name. Did she wear too much perfume? An Ling laughed softly. No, it's not like that. They say she was a real woman, from the western regions, Xinjiang. It was during Emperor Qianlong's time, generations ago. She was called the fragrant concubine because her skin was said to naturally carry the scent of flowers. Some claimed it was a divine fragrance that could be sensed from yards away. Mei Ling raised her eyebrows in disbelief. Truly a natural perfume that sounds like a fairy tale. Many in the palace treat it like one, An Ling admitted, leaning in conspiratorially. But there are records that Emperor Qianlong did have a consort from the Muslim lands out west. Legend says she was initially a captive, a gift sent by a defeated rebel chieftain. She was extraordinarily beautiful and proud. At first, she wanted nothing to do with the emperor. It's said she even carried a small dagger, intending to kill him and escape. Mei Ling gasped softly. A concubine with a dagger. The audacity of it made her both fearful and impressed. But Qianlong was patient. Anling continued, eyes alight with the thrill of storytelling. He was enchanted by her. Instead of forcing her into submission, he wooed her gently. He built her a special Uyghur-style garden so she would feel at home, and he respected her customs. Over time, she softened. She fell in love with him, or so the story goes, and her dagger turned from a weapon of intended murder into an ornament she gifted to him as a token of trust. Mei Ling found herself smiling at the romantic notion. That sounds almost too good to be true. Did they live happily ever after? Anling's smile dimmed. Well, in some versions of the tale, yes, he made her his treasured concubine and they spent many blissful years. But in other versions, the story ends sadly. One says that the emperor's mother, the empress dowager of that time, grew jealous or distrustful of the fragrant concubine and had her poisoned. Another says the fragrant concubine grew ill from homesickness and passed away quietly one winter, and the emperor sent her body back to her homeland as a final act of love. A silence fell between them. Both young women knew too well how reality in the Forbidden City often turned happy narratives into tragedies. Mei Ling took a thoughtful sip of her fragrant tea. I wonder which ending is true. We'll never know. Anling sighed, staring out at the moonlit courtyard. Maybe the truth is lost, and only the fragrance of her legend remains. She chuckled at her own poetic musing. But whatever the case, it's comforting, isn't it? The idea that even behind these walls, love might bloom genuinely, even if briefly. Mei Ling nodded slowly. It is comforting. She looked at Anling and added with a tiny grin, though I hope neither of us ever has to hide a dagger in our sleeve. Anling giggled, covering her mouth. Heavens. No. I wouldn't even know where to stab properly. Their laughter mingled with the soft chirr of crickets beyond the window. After a moment, Mei Ling said quietly, Thank you for telling me that story. I suppose every concubine holds on to some romantic hope, even if we don't say it aloud. Anling reached over to squeeze Mei Ling's hand. We must, to stay sane. They fell into a companionable silence then, watching the round moon climb higher. In the distance, a night watchman clapped his wooden clappers to mark the hour. The two friends remained side by side, sharing the quiet night, and perhaps each dreaming her own secret dream of destiny and devotion in the palace. As the seasons turn, so do the fortunes within the Forbidden City. Despite Mei Ling's cautious efforts, jealousy has been quietly building, and soon it reaches a tipping point. The days that follow her promotion hold a tension that even the warm, late summer sun cannot dispel. Mei Ling tries to lie low, focusing on her painting and taking long walks with Anling in the quieter courtyards. She heeds the Empress Dowager's caution. Stay humble, cause no trouble. Yet trouble has a way of finding you when jealousy brews in every corner. That year, as the Mid-Autumn Festival approached in the 8th lunar month, the palace prepared for grand celebrations. The emperor hosted a moon-viewing banquet in the Imperial Gardens. a rare occasion when all the consorts and concubines gathered in his presence at night. Mei Ling still remembers the ethereal beauty of that evening. Hundreds of lanterns hung from the pavilions and trees, their soft glow like captive stars. The full harvest moon rose enormous and golden above the palace roofs, bathing the tiled eaves in silver, arrayed in their finest silks. The concubines took turns offering performances to honor the emperor and the moon. Some recited poetry. Others danced slowly, silk sleeves swirling like clouds. Mei Ling had prepared a short poem for the occasion. When her turn came, she stepped forward in a robe the color of midnight, embroidered with silver crescents. With the vast moon shining behind her, she recited a verse she'd composed about longing and beauty on an autumn night. Her voice, clear and steady, carried in the hush, the glad spring goes unattended, at the laurel bower where sorrow is long. But on the four walls of gold, the autumn dust clings like grief, and night holds the bright mirror up in the emerald sky, for the lonely one in the palace of Long Gate. She dared not directly imply any love for the emperor in her poem. That would be too bold. But the illusions were there for those who knew. As she spoke, her eyes briefly met the emperor's. He gave the slightest nod and a gentle smile of appreciation. A quiet murmur of approval passed through some of the gathering. Noble consort Li, watching from not far away, clutched her jeweled fan tightly. To her, that nod and smile were as good as an open declaration of favor. The emperor rarely showed such open approval in public. Li forced a smile onto her face to hide her vexation. After Mei Ling's poem, the emperor himself raised a cup of sweet osmanthus wine. "A lovely sentiment," he commented, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "The moon seems brighter for Lady Mei Ling's words." It was an innocuous remark, but in the context of the rigid court, it was significant praise. Li's painted lips pressed into a thin line. She realized that Mei Ling's influence was growing beyond the private chambers. Now, even in ceremonial settings, the emperor acknowledged her talent. That night, as everyone present sipped mooncakes and tea under the moonlight, Li's heart burned with a mix of fear and rage. In the golden glow of lanterns, she watched the emperor gesture for Mei Ling to come nearer to point out a particular constellation in the sky. The two stood side by side for a moment, the emperor pointing upward, Mei Ling listening attentively with a soft smile, though nothing improper happened. The image of them together under the moon was seared into Li's mind. By the time the mid-autumn festivities ended, noble consort Li had resolved that something must be done. Her pride and position could not tolerate Mei Ling's continued rise. The very next day, Li began to lay her plans. One afternoon, a polite invitation arrived for Mei Ling from noble consort Li. Would she join Li for tea in her pavilion by the lake? The wording was sweet, impossible to refuse without causing offense. Mei Ling felt her pulse quicken. She knew a solitary meeting with Li could be a minefield. Still, she had to accept. The pavilion was beautiful, open on all sides to the breeze, overlooking a tranquil lake dotted with lily pads. Noble consort Li had laid out a tempting spread of pastries and fruits. She greeted Mei Ling with a flawless smile, as if they were dear friends. "Sister, thank you for coming. I thought it would be nice for us to enjoy the spring air together." Mei Ling returned the smile gently. "You are most kind, Your Highness." As maidservants poured aromatic tea, Li chatted about trivial things, the weather, a new bolt of silk that arrived from Suzhou, a little joke about a pet parrot in the Empress's aviary. Mei Ling answered politely, waiting for the other shoe to drop. She noticed Li's personal maid hover strangely near, eyes flicking to Mei Ling's cup. A subtle alarm bell rang in Mei Ling's mind. Li lifted the teapot. These chrysanthemum teas can be so light. Let me refill your cup. Dear, she poured, and Mei Ling observed a tiny muscle in Li's jaw tense. There, a glint of something sly in Li's gaze as she watched Mei Ling pick up the cup. Mei Ling's heart thumped. Is it safe? Anling's warning of poison surged back. With utmost poise, Mei Ling brought the cup to her lips. She pretended to sip, barely wetting them, then set it down. Exquisite aroma, she commented, revealing nothing. Li's gaze sharpened. Do have a cake as well. These are my specialty, sesame honey cakes. Mei Ling knew noble consort Li was famed for her confections. It was unlikely she'd taint her own hallmark treat. Or was that exactly why she would, to disguise ill intent, still, refusing could provoke Li's wrath openly? So Mei Ling delicately picked up a small piece and nibbled. The sweetness coated her tongue, and for a moment, all seemed normal. Li engaged her in a story about a court painter's amusing mishap. Mei Ling found herself almost relaxing, thinking perhaps she was being paranoid. But as she swallowed the last bite of cake, a sudden wave of dizziness hit her. The pavilion's red pillars seemed to wobble. She blinked, pressing a hand to her temple. No, it can't be. Noble consort Li's voice sounded distant. Are you all right? Sister, you look pale. Mei Ling's stomach lurched. A cold sweat broke out on her back. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words tangled. The edges of her vision darkened. With mounting panic, Mei Ling realized something was very wrong. She tried to stand. Immediately. The world tilted. Her teacup shattered on the floor as she knocked it over. A sharp cramp shot through her middle and she doubled over, gasping. Her insides felt as though clenched by an iron fist. Li's maids rushed forward. Quick! Help Lady Mei Ling! Oh, no one exclaimed with theatrical concern. Noble consort Li herself stayed back, covering her mouth in feigned shock. But Mei Ling caught a flicker of triumph in those beautiful eyes. They think they've won. The thought cut through Mei Ling's pain like a dagger, summoning whatever strength remained. She clutched at the sleeve of the nearest maid. Get the Imperial physician. She managed to rasp. Then her body betrayed her. Hot bile rose in her throat. She turned and retched violently over the side of the pavilion, expelling what she could of the tainted cake. Chaos erupted. Servants were running. Mei Ling's own maids, alerted by the commotion, arrived in horror to see their mistress collapsed on the wooden floor. Noble consort Li patting her back with false solicitude. Li Hua gathered Mei Ling up. Mei Ling's vision blurred, but she could discern Li leaning in to whisper in her ear, so soft only she could hear. Next time, the lake won't just taste your tea, it'll taste all of you. The sweet smile never left Li's face as attendants finally carried Mei Ling away. That night, Mei Ling battled fever and agony in her stomach. The Imperial physicians came and went. They declared it an unfortunate case of severe food poisoning, perhaps from bad sesame oil. Mei Ling was no fool. The doctors likely suspected foul play, but would not dare accuse a high consort without incontrovertible proof. They provided antidote drafts and watched carefully. Thankfully, because Mei Ling had eaten sparingly and expelled much of the toxin quickly. She survived the worst of it. But she remained weak for days, confined to bed, her skin ashen and her body aching. Word of Mei Ling's illness spread through the palace grapevine like wildfire. In whispers behind screens, concubines murmured that noble consort Li must have had a hand in it. Who else, but nothing was said officially. One person, however, was not content with whispers. The emperor himself came to visit Mei Ling when he heard she was ill. It was unprecedented for him to call on a concubine's sick room, which showed how concerned he'd become. He sat by Mei Ling's bedside, holding her hand as she struggled to sit up. Mei Ling was frail, tears of frustration in her eyes. She could not speak openly. What if Li had spies even here? But she didn't need to. The emperor saw the fear in her gaze and the way she trembled. He frowned, brow furrowed deeply. "Tell me truly, did someone harm you?" Mei Ling's eyes filled, and she squeezed his hand. I'm not sure, Your Majesty." A convenient lie, perhaps, to protect them both from the implications. He understood nonetheless. His face darkened in rare anger. Without another word, he stood and left, his robe swirling behind him. What followed was swift, quiet justice. The emperor ordered an investigation, extremely discreet, led by the chief eunuch. They examined the remains of that ill-fated tea-gathering. One of Mei Ling's maids had cleverly saved the dregs of the teapot and some crumbs of cake. The imperial alchemist tested them and found traces of a certain toxic herb. Though no formal charges were announced to avoid scandal, the emperor confronted noble consort Li in private. Details of that confrontation never became public. But the result soon did. Noble consort Li fell from grace as rapidly as a star shooting out of the sky. She was stripped of her title as noble consort and demoted 2 ranks to the equivalent of a mere concubine. The official reason given was unsuitable conduct leading to disharmony, an oblique reference to her offense. Moreover, the emperor sent her away from the center of court. She was assigned to live in a distant, quiet palace on the outskirts of the Forbidden City, effectively under house arrest. That same evening, Mei Ling happened upon a glimpse of Li's humbled exit. From the shadows of her pavilion, she noticed a small procession moving along one of the side paths, a simple curtained sedan chair borne by 2 eunuchs, accompanied only by a pair of lantern-bearing servants. There were no farewell banners, no attending ladies, a departure in disgrace. As the sedan passed under an archway, a breeze fluttered the gauze curtain aside. In the wavering lantern light, Mei Ling caught sight of noble consort Li's face within. It looked ghost-pale and drawn. Her eyes puffed from crying, staring out at nothing. For a heartbeat, Li's gaze shifted toward where Mei Ling stood hidden. Mei Ling's breath caught. She wasn't sure if Li truly saw her in the darkness, but in that instant Mei Ling felt a pang of sorrow alongside her relief. Li had been her enemy. Yes. But to see the proud woman now so diminished, it was a stark reminder of how fortunes could shift overnight in this world. Mei Ling stepped back into the shadows as the eunuchs carried Li away into obscurity. The pool of lantern light bobbed and receded down the corridor until it was swallowed by the greater darkness of the palace grounds. Mei Ling realized her hands were trembling. She clasped them together tightly. Not so long ago, she reflected, it was Li who likely watched me with scorn as I entered these gates. Now I watch her leave. Such was the capricious wheel of fate in the Forbidden City. She returned to her room, her mind spinning with conflicting feelings, triumph, guilt, caution. The fall of noble consort Li taught her a final lesson. Mercy was scarce in the imperial harem. If she ever were to fall from favor, could she expect any compassion? Almost certainly not. That night, Mei Ling knelt before her small altar longer than usual, thanking the heavens for her protection and praying for continued guidance. In her silent prayers, perhaps she even prayed for noble consort Li, that the woman's fierce spirit might find some peace in exile. As Mei Ling regained her strength in the weeks after, she experienced a storm of mixed emotions. Relief. Certainly. The woman who wanted her dead was neutralized, but also a grim understanding one does not survive here without sacrifices. Noble consort Li's downfall was, in part, the result of Mei Ling inadvertently becoming a focal point of competition. I never wanted any enmity, Mei Ling thought sadly. Yet it had happened. Winter deepened, and with it came the most important celebration of all, the Lunar New Year. For Mei Ling, this would be her first new year in the Forbidden City. Unlike the uncertainty and fear that had clouded her arrival the previous spring, she entered this festive season with a cautious sense of hope. The Empress Dowager decreed that the New Year's festivities be especially magnificent to bless the empire and, perhaps implicitly, to mark a fresh start after the turbulent events of the past year. On New Year's Eve, the inner court was alive with rare joy. The emperor held a grand banquet in the Hall of Preserving Harmony, an honor for the consorts, as such feasts often only included male officials. The empress sat at the emperor's right hand. Mei Ling and a few high-ranking consorts were seated further down, and the hall was illuminated by the soft glow of countless red silk lanterns, painted with gold characters for fortune and longevity. The aroma of delicacies filled the airbird's nest soup, braised abalone, sticky rice cakes sweetened with jujubes, symbolic foods to ensure a sweet year. Mei Ling wore a new gown of rich, festive red, embroidered with golden peonies and trimmed with snowy white fox fur at the cuffs to ward off the winter chill. In her hair, she secured the white jade plum blossom hairpin the Empress had given her, a personal touch that did not go unnoticed by the Empress, who gave Mei Ling a small approving nod when their eyes met during the toasts. Throughout the evening, traditional performances entertained the assembled court. Court musicians played the stirring melodies of the spring welcoming song on flutes and strings. Troupe dancers performed an energetic lion dance, trailing silk and snapping a colorful lion costume to the delight of onlookers, to symbolically chase away evil spirits for the new year. Even the emperor looked relaxed. He laughed aloud when a pair of well-trained pet monkeys, a gift from a southern ambassador, were brought out, dressed in tiny brocade costumes, to perform comical tricks that made the imperial children squeal with delight. As midnight neared, eunuchs brought around warmed rice wine spiced with plum and ginger. Everyone raised their cups as the emperor stood to offer the New Year blessing. May our empire prosper. May our people know peace. And may the inner court remain a source of harmony and joy, he proclaimed, looking around the hall. His gaze lingered meaningfully on Mei Ling as he spoke of harmony and joy, causing her to blush and smile into her cup. Moments later, the first thunderous boom of fireworks shook the night. The emperor had arranged an extravagant fireworks display in the courtyards beyond. All in attendance hurried outside, bundling against the biting cold, to watch. Mei Ling stepped out into the frosty courtyard with the others, her breath visible in white puffs. High above, the black sky exploded into blooms of red, green, and gold sparks. Each explosion sent cascades of shimmering light over the upturned faces of the court. The concubines clapped and gasped like children at the spectacle, a moment of genuine awe that made rank and worry briefly dissolve. As Meiling watched a particularly beautiful golden chrysanthemum firework spread across the heavens, she found herself silently making her own wish for the year, a wish for continued peace in her life, for the well-being of those she loved, including her faraway family, whom she imagined seeing the same fireworks from their distant town, and for the small new hope blooming inside her to grow safe and strong. Eventually, the fireworks finale burst in a deafening volley of color, then faded into smoke and stars. The court began to disperse, chattering happily as they returned to their quarters to rest and prepare for the New Year's Day ceremonies come morning. Meiling, her heart full and her mind buzzing with wine and wonder, felt not tired at all despite the late hour. Excusing herself from the stream of departing courtiers, she decided to take a small detour through a quiet garden path to clear her head and reflect before the night ended. That is how she finds herself now, walking alone under the cold, brilliant New Year's moon, the same moon, she muses, that she once gazed at longingly as a newcomer. Only this time she walks with far less fear in her heart. As she lingers a moment longer, Meiling feels the presence of those who came before. She almost imagines a line of figures behind her in the courtyard's darkness, the shades of bygone concubines standing in their court robes, looking up at the same moon. Some would have envied her current fortune, others might have pitied her inevitable sorrows. All of them were bound together by the invisible threads of palace fate. Meiling closes her eyes and offers a silent salute to those unseen sisters. I carry your story too, she thinks quietly, and I will not forget. The moon continued its slow path westward, eventually dipping behind the vermilion walls. The forbidden city fell into its deepest slumber in those last hours before dawn. But Meiling remained outside a while, bathed in silver light. She feels she might soon no longer be alone, for days now. She has sensed subtle changes within herself, a faint nausea at dawn, a new heaviness in her bosom, quiet signs that hinted she might soon no longer be alone in her own heart. The palace physician's discreetly joyful nod that morning had all but confirmed what she scarcely dared to voice. Meiling was with child. Yet even this budding happiness was tinged with complexity. She knew that if she bore a son, custom might dictate the boy be raised by the empress as her own, an honor and yet a heartbreak, to yield her child for the sake of dynasty. If she bore a daughter, the girl would be a princess, cherished by her royal father, but destined to live the same cloistered life behind palace walls. Meiling accepted these possibilities with a steady heart. Whatever came, she would face it as she had faced all trials in the Forbidden City, with hope tempered by wisdom. Her hand drifts to her stomach as she stands in the quiet garden. Despite the uncertainty such news brings, a gentle smile graces her lips. For the first time in a long while, she truly feels that the new year might bring a new beginning, not just for the empire, but for her personally. Steeling herself against the cold, Meiling finally turns to go back inside. With that, consort Meiling, once a wide-eyed girl, now a woman tempered like steel, stepped inside and let the doors close gently behind her. The carvings of phoenixes and peonies glowing in the lantern light. For days now, she had sensed subtle changes within herself, a faint nausea at dawn, a new heaviness in her bosom, quiet signs that hinted she might soon no longer be alone in her own heart. The palace physician's discreetly joyful nod that morning had all but confirmed what she scarcely dared to voice Mei-ling was with child. Yet even this budding happiness was tinged with complexity. She knew that if she bore a son, custom might dictate the boy be raised by the empress as her own, an honor and yet a heartbreak, to yield her child for the sake of dynasty. If she bore a daughter, the girl would be a princess, cherished by her royal father, but destined to live the same cloistered life behind palace walls. Mei-ling accepted these possibilities with a steady heart. Whatever came, she would face it as she had faced all trials in the Forbidden City, with hope tempered by wisdom. Inside her chamber, the night is still and warm. The braziers are glowing softly, and her maids sleep curled on pallets in the outer room. Mei-ling sits for a moment on the edge of her bed, resting a hand lightly over her abdomen, a tiny, protective gesture. She knows not what the future holds. But tonight, she allows herself to envision, just for a moment, a little boy or girl with the emperor's eyes and perhaps her nose, running through a sunlit garden chasing butterflies. The thought makes her heart swell. Perhaps that is the greatest secret of Imperial Concubines, she muses, that even in the confines of the Forbidden City, they dare to dream of futures for their children, of love and legacy that might outlive them. In dreaming, they claim a small piece of freedom that no wall or rule can take. She gently blows out the lantern by her bedside. In the darkness, she can just make out the shape of the white jade plum blossom hairpin on her dressing table, a symbol of resilience under hardship, a symbol of her. As she lies down, she feels peace washing over her. The midnight silence is broken only by the distant call of a guard and the soft crackle of the brazier's coals. She laces her fingers over her middle and closes her eyes. Tomorrow, and every tomorrow after, she will wake and perform the dance of palace life again. She will greet the empress with perfect propriety, smile in the emperor's presence, share quiet jokes with Anling when no one listens, and nurture whatever hope life grants her, whether it's a new year, a new life growing inside her, or simply the courage to face another day with grace. And perhaps one day, many years from now, when she herself is old and gray, she will sit in some quiet corner of the Forbidden City and tell a young girl like her former self about all this. The beauty and the pain, the secrets and the lessons. She'll tell it gently, like a bedtime story, the way I've told it to you. In the meantime, as dawn nears, Mei-ling drifts to sleep with a heart more hopeful than it has been in a long time. The price of life in luxury was indeed sorrowful solitude behind closed doors, as the poet once wrote. But tonight, Mei-ling does not feel entirely alone. Her own story and those of the women before her have blended together, giving her strength. The moon has set, and soon the first roosters will crow from distant hutongs beyond the palace, announcing the day. But in this moment, all is calm and hushed. If you've stayed with me through this long journey, my friend, thank you. I hope this tale has brought you some insight and gentle intrigue. The world of Imperial Concubines was complex, luxurious and bitter by turns, and not so different from our own in some ways. With its cliques and longings, its acts of kindness and flashes of cruelty. Feel free to share your thoughts or questions in the comments. I'll be glad to hear from you. And until next time, may your nights be peaceful and your dreams filled with wonder. Listen closely. Can you hear it in the quiet before sunrise? Perhaps you might catch the faint echo of sighs, the sighs of long-ago concubines carried by the wind. Their stories haven't truly vanished. They live on in places like this, in the telling and the remembering. Good night, dear friend, and take care.